SiyaRam. The Untold Story of Sita, an empowering tale for our time by Dina Mariam. I was born in the ancient kingdom of Vidya, also known as Mithila, into a poor Brahmin family. Misfortune had come to my family several generations earlier, and we had been taken in as servants by the Janak family. My father served in the household of Maharaja Janak and later under the renowned Raja Janak. His father and grandfather had also served in the household, and so by the time my father came along, our family had gained a well respected place in the palace and was greatly valued by the other attendants and servants. My father's body and mind were wholly devoted to the Maharaja and his family, and this was the understanding of our role in life that was conveyed to me from early childhood. There was no task too lowly for my father if it in any way would serve the needs of the Maharaja. I don't remember my mother. She died when I was young, and so my family consisted of my father and me. Although a number of the servants took turns caring for me when I was young, most often I accompanied my father when he performed his various chores, as he was loath to let me out of his sight. When I was a child, the responsibility for the kingdom's governance passed from father to son. When Raja Janak became the ruler, he was revered by the people, even beyond the normal feeling of devotion and obedience to a Maharaja. It is an understatement to say that my father had the highest regard for the new Maharaja. For those of us in the household, Janak Baba, as we called him, was more like a father to all of us, young and old alike. Even at his young age in the kingdom, he was considered not only the Maharaja but a rishi, a great sage. Few Maharajas could match his stature. My father was not alone in believing this. I was told by my father from an early age that the Maharaja did not distinguish between people's stations in life because he saw the interior of a person, not the outer form. He saw into a person's heart. This was a well known fact, and it was a quality that elevated him in the people's mind even more. There was a mutual love relationship between the Maharaja and the people, and thus the kingdom enjoyed an unusual sense of harmony and peace. Opposition to him was unheard of, and there was no questioning his deeds, which were always for the good of the people. The palace where I grew up and served was beautiful but had little display of excessive wealth or grandeur. Simplicity and beauty existed side by side. The palace was decorated with the artistry of people, painted vases and other pottery, murals, and finely woven clothes. The Maharani Sunaina had a keen sense of beauty, and she helped to create a refined and elevated atmosphere, not only in the palace but also in all of Mithila. The Maharaja and Maharani had no children. It was said that this was because of the ascetic nature of Janak Baba. Much of his time was spent visiting the rishis and sages or hosting them at the places or in a meditative seclusion. They came from far and wide to visit the one they called the Rishi Maharaja, and the blessings these visits brought created much activity and joy in the kingdom. All of the people benefited from the wisdom of the Maharaja, as he would help solve the problem of any person, and thus he became our nearest and dearest Baba. It was a happy environment for most people except my father, who had a dour and brooding temperament despite the blessing he received from being near to Maharaja. To say my father was strict would be too mild a description. A perfectionist when it came to performing his duties for Maharaja. He often would redo the tasks of the other servants and attendants because he said those tasks could be done better. But he always did so humbly. Too humbly, I often thought. One can always do better was a refrain I often heard him repeat, and I would silently protest. Is it always possible to do better? My father never failed to remind me that our family survived the misfortunes that had visited us through the kindness of the Janak family. We owe our lives to them, he repeatedly told me. Without their kindness, I don't know what would have happened to us. As I grew older, I began to inquire of my father what those misfortunes were and why they had come to us, but he never answered. He only gazed out into space without a blank stare and shook his head. Once he replied, "It is not for you to know," and so I left it at that, not satisfied, but too timid to press him. I didn't accept that he would never let me go far from him, that I could never accompany the other children on the rare occasion of an outing to the forest. This brought me many tears and much protest, but he was adamant. Worst of all, I could never go down to the river as bathing in the river was off limits to me. I seemed to be the only one who had this restriction, but my father was insistent and no amount of pleading could move him. During the day, up until the age of 8 or 9, when I received my own chores to perform, I would accompany my father as he oversaw the various activities needed to keep the household functioning smoothly. In the evening, before my father retired, he would seek the blessings of Janak Baba. Sometimes I would be allowed to tag along, standing shyly by the door as my father rested his forehead on the feet of the great sage. I remember gazing at the two of them, the stately figure of Janak Baba, with his tall frame, his dark hair pulled back and a flowing beard, spotted with grey even at a young age. He seemed to bear an elder wisdom from young adulthood. His figure was slender, as he did not take in much food. The features of his face were finely chiseled, with a straight nose and full lips that were overshadowed by his beard. His face was kindly and calm. My father had a very different appearance. Although he was also tall, he always stooped with bent shoulders so as to appear of shorter stature than his Maharaja. He was exceptionally thin, as he ate even less than Janak Baba, and his face always wore a stern expression, which only softened when in the presence of Maharaja. When I had the occasion to accompany my father on this nighttime ritual, I would always hear the Maharaja say in a gentle voice, "Rest well, Dushyanta. May you have a peaceful sleep." No matter the hour, my father would perform this ritual, as he knew that the Maharaja slept little and would receive him. My father would be unable to sleep without his blessings. Once I asked him why, and he replied that if he died in the night, he wanted to make sure he had received Janak Baba's blessing. This response brought me no comfort. What would become of me if my father died in the night? Sometimes Janak Baba would leave the place for weeks on end, visiting one of the sages in the kingdom or retreating into solitude for his own meditations. My father would be anxious at those times, and often he would sit up through the night waiting for Janak Baba's return, as if his life depended on his arrival. I mistook my father's sternness for lack of caring, and so the seed of feeling unloved began to germinate in me. As I grew older, the timidity that I felt in the presence as a child transformed into resentment. Perhaps it was the lack of any motherly qualities in his nature, or perhaps it was the absorption in his work of service. But he seemed to take no notice of the emotional peaks and valleys that accompany a child's development. My feelings seemed inconsequential, and so I learned to keep them to myself. The first explosion between my father and me happened when I was about 12 years old. One of the servants had come to borrow something from my father. Aditi was a kindly, middle aged servant who had a liking for me. More than the other servants, she expressed an almost motherly affection for me as a child. When she would perceive an expression of loneliness on my face, she would press me against her chest and whisper words of encouragement. When she came this day and saw me tidying up the room that I shared with my father, she mentioned to him casually that I would some day make a good wife. He replied sharply, "Meenakshi will never marry." She appeared shocked by his tone, but didn't want to question him, and so quietly left the room. "Pitaji," I exclaimed, "why did you say that?" "Because it is true," he replied in a stern and determined voice. "Am I so unattractive that nobody will marry me?" I asked in a hurt tone. I did not think myself ugly, but I also did not think myself beautiful. In fact, I had never thought much about my outer appearance. But I was coming of age, growing into womanhood, and for the first time I became conscious of my appearance, questioning whether I was indeed unattractive. I was of middle stature, neither tall nor short, on the thin side, with a somewhat darkish complexion, but not unusually so. My hair was too thin and did not make a luscious braid as it twisted down my back. But how could that matter? The only unattractive thing about me was a mole on my lower right cheek. But again, I didn't see how that mattered. We were taught in Mithila to focus on inner, not outer beauty, on our character. So, how could my appearance affect my ability to marry? My father's face softened just a bit. "Your appearance is fine, Meenakshi. It has nothing to do with that. I am determined that you should not marry, because if you do, some great misfortune will befall you as has befallen me." "Why do you keep saying that?" I began to cry. "For my whole life I have heard you talk about misfortune. What misfortune, Pitaji? Why can't we be happy like everyone else? Why are we less fortunate than they? Why, Pitaji? Why?" The tears were flowing profusely. Never had I shown such emotion to my father, but the thought that he was blocking what might be my only route to happiness was too much to bear. My father didn't answer. He stared straight ahead into the air. Finally, he said, "There are things we cannot change, child. Neither you nor I can change what has been done in the past. Even Janak Baba cannot change it. But he has taught me patience and sacrifice and forbearance. This is what I wish for you. You must learn to accept what has been given to you in life. If you perform your duties diligently, you will find contentment as I have. His words did not satisfy me, and my tears increased. Rather than taking me in his arms and soothing me, my father replied, "You must accept what I have told you and not think of marrying in this life. It is for your own good, to spare you much misfortune." With those words, he left the room, and I sank into despair. After that, greater distance crept between us, and fewer words were spoken. Despite my own troubles with my father, I could see that he was a model servant, respected by the others in the household, and I did try to follow his behavior, speaking modestly and respectfully to all, no matter their position in the household, never contradicting, never placing demands, putting my own needs, desires, and feelings aside for the good of the household. It was difficult but valuable training. Whenever my father saw me seeking something for myself or expressing dissatisfaction, one look from him would squash whatever was arising in my mind or heart. Gratitude was a quality much valued in the household, and this was set by Janak Baba and his wife Sunainama. They never failed to express gratitude to their servants and attendants and did their best to make their life easier for us. It was our understanding that each person fulfilled an essential function in the household that was as important as any other role. No work was demeaning, and no one was treated as being worth more or less than the others. But as a young girl, I did not fully understand this concept and had a feeling that my father, after his long and hard service, was more deserving than the others. Whenever any indication of this feeling emerged, my father was quick to respond. One day he said to me, "Meenakshi, you must find contentment in what has been given to you in life. We are very fortunate to be able to serve Janak Baba. I have such gratitude for this, and I pray that you do as well." I nodded. "I know, Pitaji, you have taught me this. I will find happiness in serving." I do not speak of happiness, Meenakshi, only contentment. It is contentment that I wish for you. Again I nodded. I could not say that I shared his feeling for Janak Baba, although I very much wanted to. Janak Baba was too distant a figure for me. I had great respect and reverence for him, but felt very shy in his presence, and so never came in close proximity, never looked directly at him, never spoke to him. When I observed him from a distance, I could sense the joy that bubbled out of him, and I could see the love that everyone held for him. His smile, his laugh, lit up the whole palace. Why could Pitaji not have this joy? Why couldn't I? As I grew older, I began to appreciate the respect the other servants showed my father, and to feel a bit of pride in my father's honored position in the household. He supervised the other servants and made sure the household functioned smoothly, with no chore left undone. If any servants took sick or for some reason could not perform their functions, my father would immediately take over. No task was too menial or lowly for him. This bothered me, as I thought he often took on chores that were beneath his station, but for the most part I kept quiet. One day, when I was about 15, I came upon my father scrubbing the floor of the entry to the palace. Despite his age, he was on his hands and knees, oblivious to all else. His health was not the best. I could hear his heaving breathing and grew alarmed. Pitaji, what are you doing on your hands and knees? I whispered as I bent down beside him. This is not right. He turned his gaze to me and didn't respond. When I questioned him again in a more urgent tone, he ordered me to go to our room and wait for him there. I hurried back to the small room we inhabited behind the palace, my chest heaving, disturbed by his tone, knowing I had stirred his displeasure. Instinct, I knew he would be angry about my questioning him. On the way, I met Aditi. She caught me by the arm, and when she saw the expression on my face, asked what was wrong. Pitaji is on his hands and knees, washing the floor to the entry, I blurted out. I see in his face the strain it is causing him, but he won't listen to me. Is there no one else to scrub the floor? She shook her head slowly in disapproval. The woman responsible for this chore left the household this morning, and we are all busy preparing for the Maharaja's guests who are soon to be arrive. But he should not have done this. He could have asked any one of us. Don't bother about it, Meenakshi. Don't question your father now. He is so determined that the palace look its very best for the guests. When my father returned to our room later that day, I could see by the flushed look on his face and the heaving of his breath that he was not well. But I did not say anything. I looked away, pretending to be busy. When he spoke to me, I answered in monosyllables. Look at me when I speak to you, Meenakshi. His tone was harsh. I turned to face him, my eyes brimming with tears. What is this resistance I sense in you? I didn't answer. When he persisted, I blurted out. Pitaji, what will the other think to see you on the floor like that? But as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I regretted them. If I never wanted to withdraw words spoken, this was the moment. What other things? Is this your concern? Is this what I have taught you? Is there any task to be ashamed of when we are preparing the palace for Janak Baba's guest? His voice betrayed his disapproval of me. I am surprised at you, my child. I should have known to stop there, but I didn't. But Pitaji, I protested, I can see the strain it is causing you. Surely one of the young servants. He cut me off. Yes, there is a young servant, and I will see what she takes up the task. Little did I know that this young servant was to be me. What has gotten into you, Meenakshi? I didn't answer. I knew that I was wrong. Yet I couldn't help but feel that Pitaji had humiliated both himself and me. Finally I said, in a small voice, We are Brahmins. Are we not, Pitaji? This statement did not have a good effect on my father. He raised his hand as if to strike me. I looked up at him in fear. He had never done that before. Then he paused and lowered his hand, regaining his self-control. I could not bear to see the look of pain on his face, so I burst into tears and ran from the room. For the rest of the day, I sat outside, hidden behind a leafy tree. As dark was approaching, I saw him come to me. Instead of scolding, I assumed he would. He lowered himself quietly beside me and spoke in a gentle voice. I want you to understand something, Meenakshi. Look at our Maharaja, who is our model in every detail of life. Have you not heard how he goes from village to village, helping the people plough their fields? Do you realize what hard work it is to use one of these new plows? I would not have the strength to do this, yet he does it again and again. He does not stand and instruct them, he teaches by doing. I have seen him sweat and toil in the fields, showing the farmers how to turn the soil. Is that a task fit for a Maharaja? In this way, he is teaching us there is no work too humble. There is no greater or lesser among us. Our Maharaja does not see himself to be any different from the poorest in his kingdom. I have heard him say this many times. It is only that his duties are different, and our is to do whatever is required in this household to ease his burden and the burden of the others here, so that he can govern and guide us, free of cares. If that means performing what you call the lowest of tasks, I am happy to do it, and I hope you will be. This is the path to contentment. I understand what you are saying, Pitaji, and I will keep trying. I am sorry that I am not a model servant, but I will keep trying, I promise you. I looked at him sadly, glad that he was no longer angry with me, but frustrated with myself that I couldn't be as he was. I cannot change your attitude. I can only point out you in the right direction, my child. You yourself are the only one who can change the way you feel, and I pray for your well-being that you will be able to do so. My heart was heavy the whole of that day and the next and the next. Despite the festivities that accompanied the arrival of the Maharaja's guest. But it grew heavier a few days later when the guest had gone, and my father came to tell me that the servant responsible for scrubbing the floors and the other laborious task was too ill to return. He looked at me hopefully, as if he wanted me to offer to take up the task, but I refrained from saying anything. Then the words came out of his mouth. Meenakshi, I am asking you to take up the task that this servant had been assigned. I looked at him in shock, but nodded my assent. Was he punishing me? Was my questioning of him such an egregious task? Was he trying to humiliate me? For weeks my tears mingled with the water that I splashed on the floors. My father would come to inspect my work and would inevitably find fault with it and make me repeat the whole process. The other servants looked upon me with sympathy, which made me feel even worse. I couldn't forgive him for delegating to me the lowest of responsibilities. After a few months, Aditi came to my defense, but to no avail. When she learns there is no distinction between any of the tasks, we will reassign her, Pitaji replied. But her body is not strong, and I am afraid this will damage her health, she insisted. He shook his head. It is not to punish her, Aditi, but to help her learn. It is for her own good. She must not be so concerned with the appearance. Pitaji would not relieve me of these duties. So I resigned myself to serving as the lowliest among the servants, and the distance between my father and me grew even greater. Rarely did we speak now. On occasion, I would find him looking at me as if he wanted to approach me, to say something that would mend the broken trust between us. But then I wondered whether it was just my imagination, a vain hope that he really did care. I did not have the courage to approach him, and so we remained as far apart as planets that only pass each other in the darkness of empty space, barely exchanging a greeting. 2 years passed, and despite Aditi's many attempts to intervene, nothing changed. I began to wonder if I was destined to spend my life in this manner. Finally, one day, I summoned up the courage to speak with him in what I thought was a reasoned manner. Pitaji, I thought by now I would be able to work under Aditi in the kitchen. I would really like that. Are you unhappy with the responsibilities, Meenakshi? I didn't answer, and he continued coolly. If they are too much for you, then perhaps I should relieve you of your duties and take them upon myself. No, Pitaji, I didn't mean that. I hurried to assure him. My reasoned manner was quickly departing, giving way to hurt and emotion. Why did he not understand me? Why did he make it so difficult for me? And so I blurted out, Why are you punishing me, Pitaji? What have I done that is so wrong? Have you no feelings for me? I made one mistake, I admit, in questioning you, but I have made up for that, have I not? Punishing you? He inquired in the same cool tone. I am trying to teach you how to serve, as have had to learn over the years. No task is too minor, too unimportant, Meenakshi. For want of a small task, the whole palace would fall into chaos. Do you not yet understand this? You can serve this palace and this kingdom just as well by scrubbing the floors as you can by tending to the personal needs of the Maharaja. What matters is the spirit in which you perform your responsibilities, not what those responsibilities are. I have tried to teach you time and again that there is no distinction between the types of work one does. When you truly know this, everything will change. Then I will feel that I have fulfilled my responsibility in raising you to a proper servant. A servant whose only thoughts are for the welfare of the one you serve. My hurt feelings blinded me to what he was saying. All I knew was that he treated me differently than he treated the others. To the others, he was kind and caring. If they had difficulty finishing their work, he would come to their assistance. But with me, it was different. They adored him because of his kind nature. But this nature was not the one he showed to me. You don't treat me like you treat the others. You treat me as if you don't care at all about me, as if I don't matter to you at all. And it has always been this way. I cried as I ran from the room. Meenakshi, he called after me. I knew that I had hurt him, but I couldn't contain myself. I couldn't stop the words from gushing from my mouth. To speak rudely to one's elder, let alone one's father, was a serious offense. But I could not contain the feelings that were long held back. Come back, he continued to call after me. But I didn't turn around. I hid myself in the forest that day, relinquishing all of my task. Let him punish me, I thought. I don't care anymore. In my mind, I repeated again and again the conversation between us, convincing myself that I was right, that he didn't care for me, that I was a burden on him, for which he would never forgive me. I must have fallen asleep in the forest. I awoke many hours later to the sound of my name being called by a woman's voice. I thought, surely Pitaji must have sent Aditi to fetch me. but I wouldn't let her find me. I had intended to stay in the forest through the night, as I didn't want to see my father so soon. Perhaps I wanted to frighten him, for him to think that something had happened to me, to see if he had any feelings, any love at all for me. I rose to penetrate further into the woods. But Aditi caught sight of me and came running. When I saw the expression on her face, I stopped. Something was wrong. Finally, she caught up with me. Meenakshi, we have been looking for you all day. Something terrible has happened. You must come quickly. My body stiffened when I heard these words, as if I knew what she was about to say. Is it Pitaji? I asked in a frightened voice, not wanting to hear the answer. She nodded and drew me into her arms. I heard her sob, but I was frozen, not daring to ask what had happened. After a few minutes, she whispered, Your father had an accident, my dear. I didn't respond. He sent one of the servants up to the roof to repair a leak. But he questioned whether the repair was done properly, and so he went to check on it himself. As he was climbing to the roof, he slipped and had a bad fall. She fell quiet. I was too stunned to respond. Oh, Meenakshi! She held me tight in her embrace. This should not have happened. Is he all right? I finally managed to ask. She shook her head and whispered, I am afraid not, dear. Is he not dead? Is he? I asked as the horror of the news was beginning to hit me. She nodded. Suddenly, the full force of what she was saying came over to me, and I screamed, Nahi! As loud as I could. It can't be. My voice was as sharp as a crack of thunder, sending violent waves through my body. I couldn't contain them. It was as if I had been struck by lightning. My whole body shook. Aditi drew back startled. Then she gathered me again in her arms and let me spill all the tears that I had. We stayed like this for quite some time. Then she slowly led me to where the body of my father lay as the other servants prepared for the cremation. Pitaji, I am so sorry for everything. Why did you leave me? I inquired of the empty form which no longer contained my father. You have left me all alone now, I whispered in a choked voice. I was numb for the next few days. Aditi stayed with me, but finally I had to settle into the new reality. For no reason, I began to have fears that I would be sent away. But Aditi assured me that this would never be the case. Janak Baba had loved my father, she said, and there would always be a place for me in this household. You will work under me now in the kitchen, Aditi told me, about a week after the incident. But I had other thoughts. After I began to recover from the shock of my father's death, the heavy weight of guilt set in. I considered myself responsible. If I had not spoken so harshly to him, if I had not run off, if I had returned when he called me back, perhaps he would still be alive. Perhaps he had been upset at my behavior when he tried to climb to the roof and thus lost his footing. I was at least partial to blame for his death, and I could not accept being rewarded now for what I had done. I shook my head. No, Aditi, I want to continue as before with the duties my father had assigned to me. But Meenakshi, it is not necessary. You no longer have to. I am pleading with you. It is the only way I can keep close to my father. This is what he had wanted for me, and it will help me feel that he is still with me. It is what I want. I did not speak to hear of my sense of guilt, as I was too ashamed to tell anyone of the incident. I would keep that hidden in my heart, and only I would know of my terrible deed. Aditi did her best to change my mind, but I insisted, and finally she nodded her consent. I was determined to fulfill my father's hope for me. I would become the best of servants. I would perform the loveliest of the tasks until I saw no difference between them and the more desired duties. This is what I told myself as I tried to push away the deeper reason for my decision. I tried not to think about the fact that I was really seeking to punish myself for what I considered to be my misdeeds, for questioning my father, for disturbing his peace of mind. And so I resumed my duties, but things were not as they were before. His death had such a deep impact on me that it brought about an internal change. Every night as I retired from the day's work, I would hear my father's word, as if he were just returning from seeking Janak's Baba blessing. For the first time now I recognized the deep peace that he would bring as he returned from the Maharaja's room. I no longer felt the distance, the sense of rejection. I felt that I too benefited from that blessing. One day I asked Aditi where the Maharaja had seen my father before he died. Had he given him a blessing as he lay there dying? I knew what that would have meant to my father. With Janak Baba's blessing, he would have felt this world in peace, regardless of any dispute with me. Yes, my dear, she assured me. The blessing was there. He was very saddened by the news of the accident and came immediately to see your father before he passed. We left them alone, and so I don't know what was said. But I have no doubt that he asked the Maharaja to ensure your future. She was silent for a few minutes and then added, even though he was harsh on you, Meenakshi, your father had great love for you. Never doubt that. I doubted it for many years. I replied with tears in my eyes. It took his death to convince me otherwise. Your father's thoughts were always for your future, for your well-being, that you be taken care of and spared the worst of the misfortune. She didn't finish the sentence and I didn't press her. My father always told me he would give his life for Janak Baba, and he did, Aditi. He did give his life for him. I know he was content to die while serving, while fulfilling a task he thought important. It is what he wanted, only to serve his Janak Baba, our Janak Baba. I said quietly and then added, it was what he wanted for me as well. Aditi, I am trying to have that attitude, the feeling that my father had, I confessed. Don't blame yourself, Meenakshi. Be patient. It will come to you as you grow older. We all strive for that. But your father had perfected it. He truly had no thought of himself. It was as if he were an extension, a limb of the Maharaja with no separate identity. You are right, I murmured. He had no separate identity. I used to begrudge him that. Aditi, but I didn't understand him. I argued with him. But what I would give now to have him back, I said mournfully. You have to follow your own path, my dear. Your father's way may not be your way. Are you ready now to help me in the kitchen? I shook my way. I will find peace in performing the duties my father had given me. I will not ask again, but you make sure to let me know when you are ready. I nodded, knowing it would be a long time, if ever, before I could free myself of my guilt. The years passed. I hardly had any interaction with the other servants. I would rise before them, eat alone, and retire as soon as my work was done. Even on festival days, I kept to myself. I became remote from everyone, even Aditi, who, as she began to age, became less active in the household. When she tried to check in on me, I would feign a smile and tell her how close I felt to my father now that I was fulfilling his wishes for me. She would simply shake her head. Often, when I grew tired and felt worn down by the manual labor, I would repeat to myself my father's word: there is no lower or higher work. It is the attitude with which one performs one's duties, not the duties themselves that matter. I must perfect the work my father had given me, I told myself again and again. When I have perfected it well, I will see what happens then. Indeed, the whole focus of my life had become the perfection of my work, no matter what it was. But I didn't feel the contentment I saw in my father's face after a day's work. My mind was focused on the work, not on the one I was serving. In fact, I could not say who I was serving or what. I was simply trying to appease my guilt over my father's death. A certain numbness came over to me, and I came to recognize that I was performing my duties in a perfunctory manner. It was the best I could do, and I fully expected to spend the rest of my life in this way. However, one morning when I woke up, something had shifted in me. I woke with a sense of lightheartedness that I had not known before. I had risen before the others, as was my custom, and went to start the day's work. As I knelt to begin washing the floors, I suddenly stopped and began to chuckle to myself. I realized that I didn't mind these duties at all. I realized that I could be assigned to any task and it wouldn't make a difference to me. Scrubbing the floors or selecting the clothes for Sunainama, it didn't matter. At that moment, I caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of how my father thought of his bearing, of his dignity. I realized that no chore or assignment could ever demean him because of his innate dignity, because of who he knew he was. His dignity came from inside, not from the outer world, not from how others perceived him. Oh, Pitaji, I murmured, if only I could have realized this sooner. If only I could be like you. I have been trying, but help me, please. Help me become like you. I put all my heart into those words, which were truer to my feelings than anything I had ever expressed. Not long after that, early one morning, I had finished washing one of the hallways. I saw some of the women servants going down to the river to bathe. When they saw my work was completed, they greeted me and then continued down the hall. Unexpectedly, one of them turned and asked if I wanted to join them. I had never done so before, as my father had instilled in me a fear of the river. I started to shake my head no, and then stopped myself. Something in me nodded assent. Let me just grab some of my clothes to wash, I replied. I hurried back to my room. They waited until I returned. Then we all went to the river. Only I understood what it meant for me to go down to the river with the others. Since my father's death, I had abided by all his restrictions, but now I felt free. I awoke to the fact that I was now in charge of my own life and could make my own decisions. I would start with the river. I entered the water hesitantly, one small step at a time, somewhat nervous at this first intimate meeting. The others rushed into the river and submerged themselves. The water was cool and inviting, and it felt wonderful against my skin. I ventured in up to my thighs but could go no further as I felt the tug of the tide and realized I needed to be cautious. The others were done with their bathing before I could gather my clothes for washing. We will wait for you, Meenakshi, they said. But I encouraged them to go back as they would be needed in the palace. No need to wait. I won't be long, I replied. I will just wash these few things. They hesitated, but when I urged them to return, they consented. I quickly washed the few items I had brought with me. By accident, I let go one of my scarves, which got in a wave and began to drift away from me. I reached out to retrieve it, but it drifted further from my reach. I entered deeper and then deeper into the river until I was out way beyond my comfort level. The scarf still escaped my grasp. I didn't understand the power of the river. I realized I had to give up the attempt to retrieve the cloth and try to regain my footing and make my way back to the shore. But it was too late. The current was too strong. It gathered me in its arms, drawing me further from the shore. I began to panic as the waves pulled my head under the water. I fought for air as I struggled against the current, realizing that I was helpless against the running tides. The thought came into my mind to let go and allow myself to be consumed by the river. Just as the thought of death came over to me and I began to cease from struggling, just I was about to give in, to release my life and stop fighting for breath, I felt the currents reverse and begin to draw me closer to the shore. My legs touched bottom and I was lifted my head above water. I saw Janak Baba standing at the river's edge, his eyes fixed on me. He was drawing me in. I could feel the power emanating from his body. As if in response to his command, the river brought me closer to the shore until it threw me against the river bank. With trembling limbs, I came onto the rock-strewn shoreline, my whole body shaking. I sank onto the earth in front of Janak Baba, gasping for breath. He reached for me and lifted me to my feet, holding my arm to prevent me from collapsing. He took off his shawl and wrapped it around me. At his touch, my trembling ceased. I lifted my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I was able to look directly at him and see the greatness of the man who stood before me. In his eyes, I saw such kindness and warmth and a love I had never experienced from my father. At that moment, my heart opened and I wept. Here we are done with chapter 1. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll try to do better next time. Thank you.